So let me introduce you to the ComMarker Omni X, their latest in their UV laser range. And this comes packed with a whole range of brilliant upgrades. Probably the biggest one is sub-layer 3D laser engraving, like this beautiful crystal right here. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about my first experiences with it and everything you need to know. So for anyone new to lasers, let's cover off two things really quickly. Who are ComMarker and what is a UV laser? Well, ComMarker have been in the laser industry for quite a few years. They have a range of different types of lasers available: CO2, fibre, MOPA and also UV. So what is special about a UV laser? Well, because of the wavelength that it uses, it means you can pretty much engrave any type of material that you want, including glass. And not only can you engrave them, it does it with really precise, fine detail, and it also does them cold. So you don't get burning from it, especially when doing things like wood. So in terms of its versatility, a UV laser is genuinely probably the most versatile laser out there. Now this is technically their third UV laser. There was the Omni 1 5 watt, then they did a 10 watt version of it, and now we have the Omni X. Now at the core of this, it is a 5 watt laser, but as I say, because of the nature of the wavelength, that is more than enough power to engrave anything that you want. But what actually makes the Omni X so different from its predecessor, the Omni 1? Well, these are all the upgrades we're going to run through over the next few minutes. And let's just dive straight in with the thing most people want to know about, which is the 3D sub-layer engraving. Now typically most lasers will engrave on the surface of the object. Obviously they can go below the surface by burning the layers away, but ultimately you're still just touching the top surface of what is available. Now the brilliant thing about this laser is it allows you to go inside the actual glass or the crystal and do the laser engraving in there. And this is probably simpler than I actually expected it to be, like super simple. You basically load a 3D model into the software. It then does all of its calculations and basically slices it up into fine little layers to which it can output for the laser, so it knows exactly where it's burning within that crystal. And that gives you these results. And you can do them in lots of different ways. You can either have it as a hollow object, you can have it filled in, you can have it with an open back or a flat back. There are really lots of variations to do this. And some of you may be thinking, well, I'm not a 3D modeler. Neither am I. You can basically get these 3D models of lots of free sites such as Thingiverse. You just download them, put them into the software and let that do the work for you. Now I'm going to come back to the software in a bit because obviously that is always a topic that people want to know. But I really just want to stress the point of how amazing these look, and it is probably one of the simplest jobs that you can do with this laser. And as well as being simple, they're actually relatively quick to do as well. All of the ones that I have engraved have taken between 15 and 25 minutes. So when you look at the quality that you're getting from this versus the amount of time it actually takes to make them, it's a brilliant combination. Now I know most of my viewers are typically hobbyists or small businesses trying to make a bit of extra income, so let's talk some prospective numbers. Well, these crystal blocks usually between $5 and $10 each, depending on the quantity that you order. Even if we take into account the overall setup time, it's still less than an hour to produce each one. Now these can sell for $40, $50, $60, maybe even more if you're doing really personalized pieces. So the potential for profit per unit is actually quite high. That's before even looking at everything else that this laser is capable of doing. So just these 3D crystals on its own really is a huge upgrade in terms of UV lasers and what type of profit they're potentially going to generate for you. So we've spoken a bit about the 3D work, and I will talk about the software to do this later on, but what else have ComMarker brought forward for this? Well, it is obviously the enclosure itself. Now typically fibre and galvo lasers are usually open, and this does raise concerns around safety because you always need to be wearing your glasses, and then there's fume and smoke extraction. Well, this is a class 1 rated laser, and I'm not going to pretend I know all the regulations, but what it does actually mean is that when you close this lid down, it is safe to look at. This will protect your eyes and obviously anybody walking in or around your workshop at the same time, including pets as well. Now, as part of this, obviously, not only is it just a shield at the front, it is a fully enclosed unit with a fan circulation system going on. Obviously, this helps to extract the fumes out of it, but it also helps to keep the unit cool as well while it is doing its work. Now what I will say on the fume extraction is that whilst this does vent out, I would still recommend using the porthole at the back for using your own dust extraction specifically for the engraving as it's going on. So basically pull as much dirty air out of this as you can and vent it outside. And not that it needs an explanation, but if you're wondering how it works, obviously you've got your work area and this is just spring mounted, so it allows it to pull down into place, stays in position, and then when your job is done it can be lifted up and out of the way. Another additional feature which I know users love is this now has LiDAR autofocusing. What that basically means is from the head of the unit it will triangulate down onto your material, know the correct distance it needs to be, and in combination with the motorized Z-axis it will set the correct focal distance. So not only does it make life easier, it really speeds things up. Now it's fairly obvious because of the enclosure that this is a bigger unit than the Omni 1. Width wise we're talking around 13 inches. You probably need just under 2 feet for the length of it, and overall with the enclosure being up just over 3 feet. So it is a bit bigger, but ultimately you get the enclosure in within it, so that is well worth it. So let's talk about work area and lenses because they are interlinked. Now this comes with two different lenses, a 150 and a 70. And what that means in relation to your work area is the 150 will be 150 millimeters by 150 millimeters, or approximately 6 inches by 6 inches. And then the 70 millimeter will be the same, 70 millimeters by 70 millimeters. Now the reason there are two different types of lenses is ultimately the smaller that the lens is, it is typically going to give you better quality. Basically the focal point of the laser is much sharper. So for example, if you're just doing general engravings on wood, you may want to use the 150 millimeter lens. If you're doing a really high detailed photo and want pinpoint precision, then you may use the 70 millimeter lens for that. So ultimately that is why you have two different lenses, but it does impact the work area that you have. Now, in terms of the work area, there is an additional accessory for this, a sliding unit, and it basically turns your 150 millimeter wide area into 400 millimeter wide. That is like a 260% increase, so it really does broaden your work area. And the way this basically works is it will sit on top of the bed here and it will just slide back and forth. So you can basically do one whole design that is 400 millimeters wide. Now as I say, this is an additional accessory, so it does have a cost on top of it, but ultimately these can be purchased as bundles at the time of buying. Now as I just mentioned about accessories, let's stick with it. As well as the sliding tabletop, you can also get different types of rotary devices for this, and all the ComMarker rotaries are essentially just plug and play for this. Now the reason there are different sizes depend on the objects you want to do. Smaller items like rings and jewellery, you're going to want a smaller rotary device. Something like drinking tumblers, you're obviously going to want the larger rotaries to be able to accommodate the weight of those. Now the other great thing about this in comparison to some of the predecessors and the other fibre lasers is this has what is now called smooth roll technology. Now smooth roll technology basically means it will do it in a continual motion, and therefore the lines or steps between your artwork should be much smoother when you are engraving. So let's jump into software, because the big question that always comes up is, does this work with lightburn? Yes, but no. At this moment in time, late August, this does not work correctly with lightburn. You can technically connect it to lightburn and you can do some things with it, but there are a lot of settings missing that ultimately limit how much you can control it. Now, as I say, this is late August. By the time people start receiving these in September, it is hopefully all going to be working correctly in lightburn. But there is one caveat to that. Now as it stands, lightburn doesn't have the functionality to do those 3D laser engravings. So at the moment that still will not work within lightburn. But the positive to everything that I've just said is ComMarker actually now provide you their very own software called the ComMarker Suite. Now usually I am against companies pushing their own software onto you for a couple of reasons. Typically it's not their area of specialty, and also it is usually buggy and underdeveloped. But I have to be honest, I've been pretty impressed with their first iteration of the software. It's very user friendly, it makes things nice and simple to do your own designs, especially the 3D crystals. It's almost import the file, click go, and it does all of the hard work for you. Now, it is not perfect. There are some things that need tweaking and improving, but from what I understand, there is a big update to the software coming in the middle of September, so all of those bugs are going to be fixed, and by the time this hits people's doorsteps, everything should be in place and working correctly. So I'm really positive about their own software, especially considering, as I say, you can't do the 3D engravings in lightburn at the moment, and also technically, well, lightburn is an additional cost on top if you don't already have it. Now let's talk about the price, because that's really important. Now, as part of their launch, this is hitting the market at around $4,500, and also the code SALE will get you an additional 5% off that, so it does save you a couple of $100 on top. Now, I'm not going to say that is a cheap price, because at the end of the day, it's still $4,500. But when you take into account the versatility of the laser, the technology in it, what it can actually achieve, well, it certainly does make it more palatable, especially in comparison to some other lasers out there. Now, so far I've been very complimentary about this machine, and it genuinely is a laser that I fell in love with. But I always like to look for things that could be improved, because ultimately that's how things keep moving forward. Now, the biggest thing for me is the fans on this unit, because you've got so many of them running at high speed in the base, in the head, in the enclosure itself. It does feel quite noisy when you start it up. It is a little bit quieter when you shut the lid, but ultimately it is like having a vacuum running. It is not too loud that you need ear defenders or something like that, but it is quite noisy because of all the fans running in order, I suppose, to do everything that it needs to do. Now, one other thing I noted that I was going to comment on that needs improvement was the dust or the fume extraction for the engraving itself. Now, the port is right at the back of this unit, and they do supply you a little fan to help with that, but ultimately, because it's so far back, that fan really isn't doing anything in comparison to the full circulation going on. However, partway through testing this, ComMarker messaged me to say they are now doing a vent chute that allows you to get much closer to the work and therefore extract the dirty fumes coming off whilst being able to keep the air around it still clean. So I was going to mention it, but they've already addressed it, which just shows how great ComMarker are. Now, when I did my review of the Omni One, it was genuinely a glowing review, because I was amazed at how versatile the laser was, how many opportunities it was going to bring to users. But the reality is, this has just stomped all over that. The enclosure upgrade, the autofocusing, the 3D engraving. It's not only brought it on one step, it's brought it on multiple steps, and ultimately just opening up more opportunities for what can be done in terms of making profit, running a small business, and ultimately just producing cool projects with it. Now, if you are thinking of purchasing one, there will be some links down in the description below, and obviously the discount code SALE will get you 5% off that as well. I do hope you found the video useful, and obviously questions and comments, let me know down below. I will do my best to answer and respond to all of them. Thank you all very much for watching. Final thanks as always goes to my patrons, and I'll see you all on the next episode, but I'm going to get back to doing more 3D engraving.